What if I told you that humankind did not land on the moon for the first time on July 20th, 1969? And, in fact, that the first moon landing occurred in 1901 when Fred Thompson piloted the airship Luna into the skies above Buffalo, New York, and reached the surface of the moon mere minutes later when the crew was greeted by the Selenites, a diminutive species of... What's that? You'd say I was insane? Well, I'm here to tell you today that, yeah, you're right. That didn't happen. But almost 500,000 people pretended it did during Buffalo's Pan-American Exposition by boarding the Trip to the Moon, an electromechanical dark ride that was the first of its kind and continues to influence theme park rides and other attractions right up to the present day. So let's do it. Let's board the Luna and take our own trip to the moon. The real issue is going to be getting this time machine to work. Welcome back to Meet Me in Dreamland, the video series where this season we are exploring the attractions in and around the Dreamland amusement park on Coney Island, which lasted from 1904 to 1911. Today we'll actually be visiting an attraction at one of Dreamland's rivals, Luna Park. Founded in 1903 and outlasting Dreamland by several decades. So, as we set off on this journey, leave a like below, or, well, maybe we won't go to the moon after all. Maybe I'll turn this airship right around and go home. I'm waiting. Okay, now that you've all given this a like, we can get going. So, the moon. What's the deal with that? That is what people have been asking for a long time, and until recently, we pretty much had to let our imaginations fill in the answers for us. Some ancient Greeks said, maybe that's where dead people go? Egyptians and Vedic philosophers figured, hey, maybe it's a god just sitting up there, looking down on us, being super creepy. Once science entered the picture, you'd think that the guesses would get more accurate, and in some ways they did. People were less likely to think that it was just some guy hanging out up there, or the place where dead people live, but their guesses still weren't quite up to snuff. Prior to Galileo, some folks said that the moon was a perfect, smooth orb. Then Galileo picked up a telescope at the local Walmart, I assume, and took a look for himself. Nope, not perfectly smooth. He saw mountains and valleys and craters and all kinds of stuff. Kind of like, Earth, maybe. And immediately, the possibility presented itself. Okay, so maybe the moon isn't a dude itself, but maybe, what if, dudes lived on the moon? 200 years later, in 1853, there was suddenly a reason to believe that, yeah, there might be dudes living on the moon. Dr. Andrew Grant, assistant to Sir John Herschel, a preeminent and world-famous astronomer, reported to the Edinburgh Current that he had taken his telescope, more powerful and probably purchased from a better store than Walmart, Best Buy or something, and pointed it at the moon, and holy shit. The moon has bison, goats, beavers with no tails, dudes with bat wings, temples, oceans, forests, all the things. And the New York Sun reprinted the article from the Edinburgh Current, kicking off a bout of lunar fever in the United States. For 6 weeks, readers were spellbound by the series of articles, obsessed even. What were these bat-winged men? What were they like? Would they be our friends? Or would they try to take our stuff? And so it went until somebody bothered to check with Sir John Herschel himself and the Edinburgh Current, and were shocked to discover that it was a hoax. You know it was a hoax. Sir John Herschel didn't have an assistant named Dr. Andrew Grant. The Edinburgh Current never published the articles in the first place. Sorry, Batman doesn't live on the moon. And neither, for that matter, do tailless beavers. But, if nothing else, the hoax showed that people were into the moon, and stories of space exploration. Edgar Allan Poe had attempted his own hoax about a trip to the moon in June of 1835, though nobody believed it. Jules Verne followed soon with his own story about a train that was shot like a bullet at the moon. I don't know, I didn't read it. Then an opera in 1875, forgive my French pronunciation, but something like La Voyage dans la Lune by Jacques Offenbach. Then H.G. Wells with The First Men in the Moon, and then in 1901, taking undoubted inspiration from Jules Verne especially, a 27-year-old midway ride designer named Frederick Thompson needed an attraction for the Pan-American Exposition in Buffalo. He'd already done cycloramas like From Darkness to Dawn, which drew on biblical imagery to show heaven and hell, and he'd done one called The Old Plantation, which, you know what, let's skip that one. What could he do to really wow the public, to take them on a journey to somewhere they'd never been to before, to make a sensation at the exposition, and you know where this is going. Yes, a trip to the moon. For 50 cents, which was equivalent to like $15 in today's money, which is still less than a lightning pass for Rise of the Resistance, guests would enter a darkened hall where a guide would lecture them on the scientific nature of the wonder they were about to experience, that of anti-gravity flight. Then the curtain would part, and an image of a flying airship would move across the backdrop and disappear on the other side. So the guests settled into their seats, ready to witness another passive cyclorama, but no. The lecturer would now instruct them to stand from their seats, climb up to a platform where the Luna itself awaited them, and board the ship. And this was the killer app of the amusement industry. Instead of merely watching the adventure, or battles play out before you like in a cyclorama, a trip to the moon was actually interactive. According to contemporary descriptions, the Luna was a green and white cigar-shaped vessel the size of a lake steamer, equipped with bat wings and featuring a large cabin in the middle and a spotlight on the front. It was suspended by guy wires, so it swayed as the guests boarded, and visible below them was a floor painted to represent the Pan-American Exposition, giving the impression that the ship truly floated hundreds of feet above the ground. Once the riders were settled, the ship lifted off and began its journey skyward, an illusion created by the flapping of the bat wings, the sway of the ship on the guy wires, a fan that blew onto the audience's face, and the use of painted screens surrounding the ship that showed a panorama of the horizon, then the clouds, the moon, and behind the guests, the Earth itself receding into the night sky. The spotlight at the front of the ship added to the illusion by directing the viewer's attention to various points of interest and away from anything that might remind them that they were still inside of a large building in Buffalo. After the Luna navigated its way over Niagara Falls, then through a treacherous storm in the void between the Earth and its final destination, the moon loomed large and bright before the ship, then sank to the level of the horizon as the Luna sailed over the surface of the planetoid. The scenic screens now showed images of lava pilings and weird rock formations. Finally, the ship entered a great lunar crater that led to a cavern where the ship landed. The guide would now direct the audience to exit the ship, but via the opposite end from where they had boarded, allowing the guests to step into another room decorated to look like an otherworldly cavern. There, the subterranean residents of the moon, the Selenites, actually costumed dwarf actors, offered the guests green cheese to snack on, and then led them through a, quote, long avenue of illuminated foliage of fantastic trees and toadstool growths. They would glimpse the frightening moon calf before reaching the palace of the Man in the Moon, guarded by giants. Inside the palace, surrounded by the opulence of the Man in the Moon's throne room, they would watch as their fantastical host commanded his moon maids to dance for them. And from there, well, right back out onto the exposition's midway without so much as a return trip on the Luna. There were other people in line to ride it, after all, at 50 cents a head. But even with the abrupt exit, the ride was a huge hit. Riders reported motion sickness, dizziness, fainting, and moments of panic, but they loved every second. According to some reporting, a few guests were even completely convinced that they had traveled through the air. No less a person than Thomas Edison himself praised the electric effects as truly wonderful. All this buzz translated to over 400,000 fairgoers experiencing the ride before the exposition closed on November 2nd of 1901, making it one of the most successful attractions at the infamously, troubled exposition. All this excitement captured the attention of George Tillieu, the owner and operator of Coney Island's Steeplechase Park, which had been doing a brisk trade on the island since 1897. Tillieu knew the secret to his park's success was novelty, and what could be more novel than this fantastic attraction? He approached Thompson and his partner Skip Dundee and suggested that they bring their trip to the moon to his park. They did, and they made an absolute killing during the 1902 season. So much so that when word that the island's original amusement park, Sea Lion Park, was about to be sold, Thompson and Dundee swooped in and bought it. Clearly, if George Tillieu's park could so lucratively host a trip to the moon, why not a park built around the incredibly bankable attraction? On May 16, 1903, after a winter of frantic building, the new park was opened to the world, and its name was, like the ship that plied the starry skies, Luna Park. At this park, a trip to the moon was twice as large as it had been in Buffalo, featured new scenery and miniatures to show Coney Island and New York City, and it was joined by other attractions in a similar vein, including 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea and War of the Worlds. And from there, well, the amusement industry is ephemeral, and the public is excited by novelty. A trip to the moon remained the cornerstone attraction at Luna Park for 5 years, when it was unceremoniously replaced by a show depicting the naval battle between the Monitor and the Merrimac, and the skyship Luna sailed off, never to return again. But its legacy as the first electrically powered dark ride was ensured. It was no accident that when Disneyland opened in 1955, 2 of its lands featured somewhat familiar dark rides as opening day attractions. Peter Pan's Flight in Fantasyland, where guests rode in a flying ship, and the showpiece for Tomorrowland, which featured, well...
One of the popular attractions here is our simulated rocket trip around the moon. After entering the Disneyland spaceport, visitors may experience the thrills that space travelers of the future will encounter when rocket trips to the moon become a daily routine.
And although neither of those rides featured any interactions with actors or the sense that the guest was a part of the story, the cutting-edge concepts behind Trip to the Moon are still in use to this day, although both the technology and the science fiction themes have been updated to suit the present sensibility. In fact, one of the most talked about attractions at Disneyland right now features guests who board a spaceship, reach a destination where they exit the ship from the opposite end that they boarded on, and enter a strange environment where they interact with actors who include them in an unfolding story. Yes, Rise of the Resistance has a trip to the moon baked into its dark ride DNA. So, if you should find yourself escaping stormtroopers on a First Order Star Destroyer, spare a thought for Fred Thompson, who made it all possible.
Dreaming of you, that's all I do. Night and day for you, I'm